Hey everybody, it's Helen Hillix, your host from My Heart to Yours. And I am really excited today to talk to you about something that I find very fascinating, and that is invisible disabilities. So I want to talk to you today about having compassion for invisible disabilities because we all have them, and I want to offer you the 5 steps for handling them differently. And I want to start out by putting some context to this because obviously we are in a society that says you're supposed to be perfect. If you don't like your nose, you just have it cut and molded into something that is more popular right now. You know, it's interesting. I saw someone today, Vanessa Marin, who's a sex therapist, talking about using a way of evaluating whether you should have this particular surgery done, whether you should change your body. And if you're changing it to meet some societal standard, then don't do it. I love that. And that's just evidence that we live in a society that teaches you that you have to be perfect to be lovable, to be attractive, to be successful, and that if you're disabled in any way, you are sent to the fringe. And you know, that can mean so many different things. And you're taught to hide anything that doesn't look perfect. I mean, I grew up in the era when, and I guess it still happens because I can't remember the name of the Victoria's Secret, has all these, a million different kinds of bras. And there are still incredibly padded bras that are popular because you're supposed to have a certain size of breasts in order to be attractive in our society. And so, that's one way of hiding that you're not perfect. And that's what you think of as an invisible disability. You're going to make it invisible if you possibly can. And that's another thing I wasn't even thinking about until just this moment, is that if you have some kind of disability that you can make invisible, you're going to do it in our society because of the way we're taught, the way we're raised. And I want to posit the possibility today, guys, what if all of that is a big lie? That you are actually lovable the way you are, and that everybody has invisible disabilities. And so who do you think you're kidding? Why would you want to hide them? What if there were a different way of dealing with those invisible disabilities? And I've got a 5-step process. It's really simple. It's not easy to do necessarily, but it's really simple. And I'm going to tell you about that in a bit. Let's talk about first, what is a disability? Because people think about that, oh, they had polio or they lost their leg in the war or something. But that's not the kind of disabilities I'm talking about, because those are not invisible, are they? But a disability in general is a physical or mental, emotional condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. Another definition was it was a disadvantage or a handicap, a dysfunction. And of course, a dysfunction can be anything from I don't have orgasms to, I can't hear. Another one said that it's a physical, mental, cognitive, or developmental condition that impairs, interferes with, or limits a person's ability to engage in certain tasks or actions or participate in typical daily activities or interactions. Now that one was more like it to me, was that it's anything that inhibits a person's ability to engage in certain tasks. So let's just take that, my specialty of sacred sexuality. People have tons of invisible disabilities that prevent them from being able to truly engage in deep, intimate sexual experiences or even deep, intimate relationship experiences because they've been traumatized in their childhood, or they've been molested in the past, or they were raped by their boyfriend. I mean, one of my clients just told me the most horrific. Her introduction to sex was when she was a freshman in college. A popular, handsome football player asked her out on a date and took her out under a tree and raped her. and she had blood everywhere. And it's like, oh my God, what a horrible experience. And that is the experience that she got to take into. And it was an invisible disability, you know, whatever the disability became. And for her, it was that the world is not safe and that she doesn't have good judgment. You know, so there are all these incredibly painful, invisible disabilities, and they can be so many things like ADD or dyslexia, old trauma, self-esteem issues, bowel disorders, alcoholism, Asperger's, depression, bipolar. You know, it's like the list goes on and on, doesn't it, of things that are invisible on the surface, but they do inhibit your ability to engage in certain activities, and one of those activities being relationships. Now, sometimes, like with someone who is severely ADD or someone who has truly been diagnosed Asperger's or autistic, even though they may physically look the same as everyone else, their disability is going to be visible or observable very quickly when you begin to interact with them. So I don't really include those in exactly what I'm talking about. I want to narrow our focus to the invisible disabilities that you're really able to completely hide until you get intimate with someone. And intimate meaning they really know you. And let's say, for instance, you were molested as a child and you may feel super self-protective, but you learn to hide that when you're dating, when you're out in public, you know, you learn to hide that. And it may seem odd, but one of the ways that people hide that feeling of being self-protective and unsafe is that they actually do the opposite. And they become promiscuous as a way of pretending that they don't carry those scars or wounds. And that they are, see, look, I am completely sexually free. That never lasts, however, not generally speaking anyway. Generally speaking, once they get into an intimate relationship, they often start shutting down and being unable to feel that the way that they presented themselves. And this is often very confusing to their partners. The ways that past molestation ends up interfering in their connection. You know, sometimes though, people do try to cover it up by promiscuity and continuing to overemphasize sexuality. See, I really want sex. You know, the molestation didn't hurt me because I really want sex. And that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on them in their relationship. So and again, it may continue to be an invisible disability, but it is motivating you to do things that you wouldn't be doing otherwise. So when we, you know, and in that case, what ends up happening often, I've seen this in my practice with clients, that eventually that thing that we're repressing, that molestation that we're repressing, eventually it will come out. You know, I'm working with a man right now who was doing a psychedelic experience, a monitored psychedelic experience as a spiritual building process. And, you know, he discovered during that time that he was molested as a child, and it has turned his world upside down. But it's like somehow he had repressed that, you know, for decades. So that's an invisible disability. And he is now seeing more and more and more ways that that experience that was completely hidden, even from him, has impacted his life and his relationships and his marriage. So let's take another example. You know, you have depression and you're on medication and have done therapy, but sometimes those feelings still break through and affect your mood and your ability to socialize and sometimes even your interest in sex at all. And again, you've probably been taught to hide that. because, otherwise you're going to be judged as defective and nobody's going to want to connect to you. And so, but if you're intimate with someone and you live with them and you're with them for a while, that's going to show up and you can't hide it anymore. So, the situations and many other invisible disabilities can impact your connections in numerous ways. And one of those is that your partner may feel manipulated or tricked. They may feel seduced, that you didn't show this secret disability sooner and you didn't give them a choice about how to manage their side of things. You didn't give them a choice about whether they even want to manage this particular disability. I've worked with so many people that are dating, and I know that because of the way our society is, again, that they experience shame about their herpes or their bipolar disorder or their past drug addiction or alcoholism or the state of their finances. Even this is something that can be hidden at first, or, it can be invisible at first. So when I ask my clients, and this is over 35 years, I can't tell you how many times I have asked when they intend to share this reality with the person that they're newly dating. And without fail, the answer that has come back to me is, well, not now. I'm going to wait a few months first and let us build some connection before I threaten that connection by telling them the truth now. And one example of that is I'm working with, I have worked in the past, I worked with a very successful physician who was newly dating a guy that she really liked, and she is bipolar and has it very well managed with medication, and it really doesn't interfere in her life hardly at all. And I asked her, when she had planned to tell this new connection, this new boyfriend, about that. And she said, well, her psychiatrist recommended that she wait at least 3 months. And somebody else, I can't remember if it was some other medical professional at work, who told her the same thing. And I said, well, what do you think that's going to accomplish? I thought you were committed to being really authentic as a solid foundation for your future relationships. And she said, you're right. And I said, well, then risk telling him. If he doesn't like what you have to say and he doesn't handle it well, then he's not your guy. So she told him, and guess what he said? In this case, it was such a lovely outcome. He said he was so grateful that he felt honored that she shared that intimate detail with him, and it brought them closer. Now, I realize that that's not always the way it's going to turn out, but it's always going to be a clarifying moment. If this person is someone that you really, if you really are meant to be with, that's how I think of it, honestly, is if you are meant to be with this person, then they're going to handle it really well. Or they're going to say, man, that freaks me out, but I need to get some support about it. And then they'll come back and say, my new counselor or my new coach or whatever said, get your head out of your butt. This is nothing, you can deal with this. So there are so many possible outcomes from it, some of which are very endearing experiences and lead to a much deeper intimacy immediately because of your willingness to be open about your invisible disabilities. And of course, since everybody has them, what does it also open the door for? It opens the door for them to start sharing about their invisible disabilities as well. So, There's no one that can convince me ever that it's the wrong thing to do to share our invisible disabilities. And if we're going to ever change the culture, we all get to do our part to heal this perfection, ridiculous expectation that we hold in our society. If everybody started exposing their invisible disabilities and released their shame around it, wow, our culture could change and be so much more inclusive at every level. You know, we are finally being challenged to accept the disabilities that are obvious. You know, for decades we've been, and we had to be forced by legislation to accept the disabilities and to accommodate the disabilities that show. And it's like, let's consider ourselves challenged and mandated to do the same with our invisible disabilities. And again, you know, it might not always turn out that way, but, and let's consider this, guys. Let's say that a guy just lost his wife, or maybe 2 years ago he lost his wife from breast cancer, and it was a devastating loss. And then he meets a new woman, and quickly into their process of dating, he really likes her. You know, he really likes her. She really likes him. And she says something, I need to tell you that I have breast cancer in remission. And, you know, he might not be able to move forward with that situation. It might just be too frightening to him that she will relapse and he will lose her, and he just doesn't think he can handle that kind of loss again. Or he might know a ton about cancer by his experience in the past. And he's actually one of the few people that says, you know, tell me about what type of cancer it is and how it's been treated and what's the prognosis and blah, blah, blah. And he might be really knowledgeable and know that she has a very good chance of living a very long life. And he's the perfect guy for her. So you just don't know. You know, there is no right or wrong answer. If he's the right guy for you, then you'll find a way forward. If he's the wrong guy for you, you won't find a way forward. And that's just showing you that he's not the right person, or she's not the right person, or they're not the right person. So, you know, telling the truth is just a clarification, right? It's just a clarification. So let me tell you that all of this in a step-by-step summary. You know, the first thing you get to do is to do the work to love yourself. Now, this is a responsibility that you have. You know, it's a responsibility, because in order to love yourself in a society that doesn't teach us to love ourselves, because nobody's perfect, this is actually work that has to be done. And the second step, which is really kind of an extension of the first step, is get the support you need to deal with whatever that invisible disability is, so that it inhibits your life and impacts your life and will impact other people's lives as little as possible. Now, again, let's take the example of depression. You know, if you know you're depressed and you want to love yourself and feel good about yourself when you're going out there into the world of dating or relating at work or wherever it is, you get to take responsibility for that depression and get it treated. And I'm not saying that you have to go on antidepressants. You may fare very well by exercising, and you're not so overwhelmed by your depression that you can exercise every day. And that you don't eat sugar and you don't drink alcohol, and you know, you've really taken on that depression so that it will have as little impact as it can have. That's going to have a tremendous impact on the way you think about yourself when you're going out there into the world. If you know that you are doing every possible thing you can to manage that invisible disability, it's going to show up very differently to the other person. The third step is to tell the truth to others from a place of feeling completely lovable. Now, again, you can't really do that unless you've done the first two steps, of getting the support you need and doing the work until you feel a really self-love experience. And then you can tell the truth to others from a place of feeling completely lovable. And part of that is, you're not going to abandon yourself, even if they don't like what you have to say. If you tell them early on in the relationship that you have herpes and they say, oh, well, we can't go on because I'm not going to wear a condom and I don't want to get herpes, I don't have it, then they're not your guy. And so it's like, you don't go into shame then and say, oh my God, I'm so horrible, I have herpes and I'm never going to find a guy. You say, totally understand, completely understand that. And that means we're not a match. I'll see you later. It's like you've done the support, you've gotten the support, and you've done the work to really love yourself and be able to stay on your own side when that invisible disability gets discussed. And if they have a negative reaction, you still stay on your own side. You know that there's nothing wrong with you that isn't wrong with millions and millions of other people too. And if you are managing your herpes, let's use that as another example. If you're managing your herpes and you know the precursor symptoms, and you take antiviral medication when you are feeling those symptoms come on, and you take responsibility for it, and you make sure you tell your sex partners before you have sex, and so forth and so forth, then it's much easier to stay on your own side because you're taking responsibility for your side of it. So that third one is to tell the truth to others from a place of feeling completely lovable. And you can't do that unless you've done the first two steps. So then the fourth step is have compassion for them if they don't accept your disclosure well. That's a very important thing, because otherwise that can lead to bitterness. You can say, well, that person was a complete jerk, when I told him about it. And it's like, no, have compassion for that person. They're scared for whatever reason. They're scared of your invisible disability. And you know what just popped into my mind right now is that one reason that they may be scared of your invisible disability is because they aren't dealing with their own. And they know that if they continue with you and they face your disability head on, that then theirs are going to get exposed too right away. And they're afraid of that. And it may be because they've been hurt by that situation in the past, like, a la cancer, the breast cancer situation. Or you may disclose to them that you're a recovering drug addict and you've got 2.5 years clean. And, they may have broken up with somebody, a year ago or 2 years ago. They may have been married and had kids with someone who just totally lost their whole lifestyle and everything because they were a drug addict. And they just don't feel emotionally prepared to go through that again. That's a possibility. And you get to have compassion for them for that, instead of judging them and then becoming bitter yourself. And the fifth step is keep practicing being honest and loving yourself and having compassion for them, whatever their response. And welcome those who feel aligned with what you are and what you bring, and release the ones that don't feel aligned. And so that's all just in the practice. And actually there are 6 steps, because I always like to add the 6th step of enjoy yourself in life. Now that you know this skill of exposing and loving your invisible disabilities and embracing those of other people, that is part of the enjoyment then. You get to enjoy the fact that you can embrace and love their disabilities too. The person who is able to embrace your disabilities absolutely is going to benefit, because they will know that they can have their disabilities embraced too. And this is not always the fact. This is not always the truth, and this is not always the case that that they're going to benefit. Like with the breast cancer thing again, they just may not be able to handle it, or the alcoholism or the herpes. There are people who just know they can't handle it, and God bless them, release them, and let them go. So those are the steps, is to get the support you need to deal with whatever is your invisible disability, so that it has the least impact possible. And that's going to lead you to loving yourself and staying true to yourself. And then you tell the truth from that place of self-love. And then you have compassion for whatever is their reaction. And you keep practicing loving yourself and sharing the truth and having compassion for yourself and them. And you enjoy the results of that authenticity and that groundedness and that self-love that just keeps growing, and the potential for real intimacy that comes from being authentic and open. So I hope this has been helpful to you guys. I'd love to hear back from you if you listen to this and it's helpful to you. And my closing always includes my email of helen@helenhillix.com and my website of helenhillix.com, where you can also leave me a message. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to see you on my Facebook and Instagram. I love you all, and thank you for listening, and thank you for watching on YouTube. And I will see you next week.